You're listening to a podcast from the BBC World Service. This is Hardtalk with me, Stephen Sackur. Thanks for downloading this edition of the programme. I do hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Hardtalk with me, Stephen Sackur. My guest today has seen his wealth reduced by some $20 billion in the last 4 years. And yet he is still one of the world's richest men. Oleg Deripaska's is an extraordinary story of business acumen and brilliant timing. He left university and started trading in metals in the chaotic Russia of the early 1990s. By his mid-20s, he'd become the boss of one of Russia's biggest aluminium smelting plants. A decade later, he was worth billions, with a dominant stake in aluminium and a hunger for expansion in minerals, manufacturing, energy and aviation. Then came the banking crisis and near financial disaster. Deripaska survived thanks to the backing of Russia's state-owned banks. He is an oligarch who made sure he never fell foul of the Kremlin. But he still faces a host of economic and legal challenges as he and Russia grapple with a recurrent question. Is Putinism compatible with a growing, open and sustainable market economy? Oleg Deripaska, welcome to Hardtalk.
Thank you.
You have had to live with this label, oligarch, for many years now, both inside Russia and outside Russia. Do you resent it in any way?
I'm not considered it's about me. First of all, in the 90s I was in Siberia when all this privatization happens, and I was managing the plant and few industrial facilities. That I'm considering myself as an industrialist. That's why, I'm okay. Whatever people would say, I'm just thinking what I can do, what I'm doing.
It's interesting you say you don't consider yourself to be an oligarch. Do you think that's true of the Russian people? Because still, even in the most recent election campaign, we saw even Mr. Putin himself still talking about the era of the 1990s, the privatizations of so many post-Soviet assets, and saying that, he, in the end, will ensure that sort of oligarchy never again happens in Russia.
Simplification never reveals the truth. Okay, it's not on a Russian agenda anymore that someone could really change, policy on, or be it so influential on politics like it was in the 90s. This time is over.
But when, just to quote some of the words that were thrown out during the campaign, when Stanislav Govorukhin, who's a campaign guru for Putin, when he said during the campaign, in the 90s, it was thieving, it was plunder, billions were stolen, factories, whole sectors of the economy, they destroyed and they stole, and they ground Russia into the dust. Do you agree with that analysis?
It's a fantasy.
But it is the man who was advising the man who is about to be president for the third time.
First of all, it's Govorukhin, as I remember you said that his official campaign manager, the real manager of campaign, was a different person. But it doesn't matter. Whatever was said in Russia during campaign, for me, is not about business. It's about some politics, because it was tough time. People went on the street unhappy with the result of parliament election. I think now it's a different time, and I'm more focusing on the future than on this rhetoric in the past.
I do want to talk to you a lot about the future, because your business empire is vast. You employ hundreds of thousands of people, both in Russia and outside Russia as well. But before we get there, I think for our audience around the world, they would love to hear how you built this business up, because you left university. I think you'd been a nuclear scientist in your studies. And within a very few years, you were running the biggest aluminium smelting plant in Siberia, I believe. How did all of that happen?
First of all, you have to go a little bit back. You have to live in a small village in northern Caucasus. You have to work very hard in your family. Let's say we called it, it's like a small farm, which we allowed to have in Soviet Union. But farm was demanding extensive work, because we do everything by our hands. You come after school, you work, then sleep, go to school, then back to work. That's how you should be trained, to understand how you can grow everything by yourself and rely upon yourself. Then you have to go to university, go to Soviet army, 2 years in Siberia training, day and night, and then when you finish university, you have to find out that there is no more Soviet Union. No one will ever, will try to, to support your study if you want to go PhD or do, go to science. And this is, how you will find yourself in the beginning of 90s. And then 7 years of hard work, and you on top of this business.
Hard work and tough times, because however one sort of tries to put it politely, it was something of the Wild West in the post-Soviet Russian economy. And to get as far as you did in a tough industry, sort of minerals and then aluminium was your speciality, you had to fight some tough battles.
You have to be prepared.
What does that mean?
Strong nerves, do a lot of sport, be focused, work hard, respect people for what they can do, not what they promise to do. Really choose who is a good worker, who is not. You can, differentiate yourself, with the country. Whole Russia, was through transition. Old system was a little bit utopia, collapsed. We start new country. No one knew how to do it. If you remember, after Second World War, when we calculated, Russia, Soviet Union dropped 30% of GDP. In 5 years after we started transition, we dropped, 2/3 of our GDP. This was just reality, how painful economically was the transition. But now, I don't know, when you've been in Russia, last time, you've seen, that we have a different Russia.
I have seen it, and again, I do want to talk about where Russia goes now, but just finishing up with these thoughts about the foundations of your business, what about the law? Because it's on the record that in the United States, you've had visa problems because of associations that the US appears to believe you had with criminal enterprise, same in Canada. When you've heard those allegations made, what has your response been?
First, I offer them to come and check. No one wants to do it. Then we work with the lawyers. I think we clean, all the stories which were mostly in newspapers. But for me, it's important what my people think, with whom I live, in Siberia, in Moscow, in the south of Russia. And they knew what was my story, and they knew what I did, And actually, if you would now go in the same city which you refer was Wild West, you would not recognize it. It's a safe environment, and people, could develop, your business and stay with their families, without, any special, preparation, for protection or something. It's much more better things, and we have no other option, at this time, institution collapse. Soviet Union, ceased to exist in less than 2 weeks.
But did you do things then that now you're prepared to acknowledge you regret?
No.
At all?
At all.
Part of your success was your ambition to build the business. You weren't happy with the original smelting plant. You wanted more. I mean, you came to dominate through RUSAL, the huge aluminium company that you now are the dominant shareholder, and you came to dominate that industry, and you expanded beyond that industry to many others as well. I just wonder now, looking at what has happened to your business in the last, say, 5 years, whether you believe that you, in the end, were captured by hubris. You went too far.
It was a crisis. Same crisis, touch everyone, who work at the same large scale. And of course, our industry still suffer a lot because of European situation. Our customer in the three main sector: transportation, construction, packaging, and transportation. You remember how tough was the environment in 2008, 2009. A lot of subsidy across the globe, for car manufacture and so on. That's why we still deal with consequence. But at the same time, if you look in the future, transportation sector wouldn't live without aluminum. we need lighter car because we all have energy efficiency, electric car, electric vehicles. We want 100% recyclability because we want to protect environment. Same for new material for construction, same for new situation on the food market. We need to package better our products. That's why I'm pretty confident that aluminum industry, will be still a very important industry for development.
How close did you actually come in those very difficult days at the end of 2008 and through the beginning of 2009? How close did you come? And after all, you at the height of it had been worth, they say, $28 billion yourself. How close did you come to going bust?
First, I'll always doubt how people making this calculation.
Well, I'm thanks to Forbes magazine for that rough estimate. But even if you weren't worth 28 billion, you were worth one heck of a lot.
It's still a business. They still promote themselves. It's why it's not. They're not an auditors.
No, that's very true. But in a way, it doesn't really matter. Frankly, between friends, what's a billion here or there? My point is this: you, from that position of enormous wealth and success, you had major problems. I just want to know how now you can tell me how close you came to insolvency, to going bust.
Not very close, because I know how the bank thinks. I know that how banks treat their client, and actually, I was capable to demonstrate quite in a quite efficient way, that there is no problem for them. And we not just demonstrate, we now showed everyone that there was no problem, and the company was capable to go through the crisis, and there was no one door haircut. Actually, banks receive a tremendous amount of profit.
You paid your debts in full, but nonetheless,
not all, but we restructured the debts. We paid a significant amount,
and debt still hangs over the company.
Yes, but we have assets which valued much more than this.
Well,
debts.
see, this is what intrigues me about your current situation. You still have a huge business. You're still worth billions of dollars, but there are people close to you, or who used to be close to you, who are convinced that you've made some terrible decisions. Now, I'm thinking first and foremost of Victor Vekselberg, who was the chairman of RUSAL, working alongside you, who quit the company earlier this year and said that the company was in, quote, deep crisis. He said the company is overburdened with debt, it's entangled in lawsuits and social conflict, and he said it's adopted strategies, that is you and the management, without the approval of us on the board.
Not everything true. And I'm really trying to show, what we can achieve, not dispute, in between. There is two different strategies, to talk, or to work. I'm a person who'd like to work and who'd like to show. And it's not just me. When you talk about 250,000 employees, don't forget there is more than 10,000 in the top management. Very experienced people with maybe total in a few thousand years of experience. It's prepared, planned work, and we exercise what we plan. And so far, I think key of our success, of course, not about resources, not about political connection or some presence from the sky. Key of our success that we very down to earth. We know how to operate the business. We know our production facility. We know how to establish production environment when people would really create enormous benefit out of their experience for the companies. And this is what we develop.
Yeah. A final thought about the state of the business right now. Why is it, do you think, that you face so many different legal actions, arbitration, settlement actions, criticisms from investors in RUSAL? Why are so many people convinced that you've taken some terrible decisions, particularly, of course, the decision to buy into Norilsk Nickel and then to refuse to sell out when you were offered a decent price? Do you think they're all wrong and you're absolutely right?
No, but first of all, I have very quick calculation methods in my head. Don't forget, I was trained to be a nuclear physicist. And just one example, Norilsk Nickel. We can sell it for 5 billion, then we get offer for 9 billion, then for 12, later 16, and I will tell you that this stake would worth 20 billion. Can you do such money in operation? I can tell you not. But if company is so good, as I can see, this company is the best asset on the globe in terms of nickel, copper, cobalt. You have to understand, one company could solve problem either China or India for the next 100 years. this asset is so unique and so well placed in the current market environment that to sell them is just to make, a crime.
So here and now on Hard Talk, you're prepared to say you will not, whatever the current price, you will not sell out of your nickel interest.
No, I'm just thinking that we have to sell for fair price, because it's not about current level of nervousness or volatility of the market. It's about company strategy. If we decided, and it was decided by the board, that our strategy to make significant either profit or synergy between our investment and our company, and this is what I follow.
All right. Mr. Deripaska, you mentioned there, you said our success of our company has nothing to do with political connections, but would you agree with the proposition that in Russia today, a very big business person such as yourself, worth billions of dollars, cannot succeed if you fall out with the Kremlin, and Mr. Putin in particular? It's just not possible, is it, to do business if you have made an enemy of the Kremlin?
You can't cross a street on a red line. It's common knowledge. Same, of course, it's same. Would General Motors succeed if they will fall out with Obama, who bail out them?
Well, I think it's a little different in Russia. We only have to look at the message sent by the case of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the former boss of UKOS, to know that in Russia, if you upset Mr. Putin and the Kremlin, the likelihood is you're going to spend a substantial chunk of your time in prison.
Khodorkovsky is a very, difficult case, and of course, I personally think that he was punished, too much. But at the same time,
that's interesting. You think it was wrong, unfair, unjust that he now faces a second 6-year jail term?
No, I know him for quite a long time. It's difficult for me to to make judgment on a court case. There is a lot of legal report and analysis. But I think Khodorkovsky, of course, he was out of Komsomol. You remember there was a young Komsomol organization. For example, I was slightly after Perestroika was expelled from Komsomol because we have a different view as Komsomol leader. He done business through the Komsomol. That's why he was always passion to some social and political agenda. And I think he mixed at some point.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, isn't the message clear from the Kremlin that if you are to continue as a very big, powerful business leader in Russia, you must not step into politics and you must not challenge the Kremlin?
I don't want to, go too much in this subject. But, for example, if you will have a big business, for example, British Petroleum will buy a few seats in the parliament, then decided to make a fraction in the parliament, to promote some British Petroleum interest. Will it be too much for British Petroleum, even in England, to do such a, strong step? They have enough money. They just need to have leaders who take this risk.
Yeah, I just think the parallels you draw with the US or Britain maybe don't work too far. Given
I agree, but I just, that's why it's not my area. I'm not a politician. It's not, I'm not a journalist.
What you are, though, is a very big businessman with a huge stake in the Russian economy, not just in metals, but across the economy. You employ hundreds of thousands of people in many businesses. Would you say it has been damaging to Russia's economy and to the degree to which Russia can attract inward investment from overseas, to see the Khodorkovsky case, to see what's happened to heritage investment as well in Russia? Would you say that this creates a very difficult problem for Russians who want to sell themselves as a place for foreigners to do business?
Khodorkovsky case actually create a certain demand for change. You've seen it this winter.
Are you behind that demand for? I mean, do you support that demand for change?
No.
Why not?
Because I can see the people who lead this. They even worse than people who manage, some area today. This is Russian reality. We have to live with understanding that we need maybe another 2 generations to complete transition. They would call you oligarchs. They will make you any label. You just need to calm yourself and say what you can do. 20 years ago we have Soviet empire, which collapsed, create a lot of problem. We still have a people, who believe that it was a better way, to live, and we just need to be patient enough, to go through and create as much opportunity, for our country, to become normal country.
Well, you talk about patience, but, the World Bank looks at the Russian economy. It says that the model of the last 5 years, relying on oil and gas revenues to keep the economy strong, isn't sustainable in the long run. You look at figures from, for example, the OECD, which says Russian workers are only 43% as productive as those in the developed Western economies. Russia needs immediate reform, doesn't it? Structural reform. It needs a better infrastructure. It needs rule of law and the courts and property rights to be respected. This has to happen now.
You know what Russia needs, I could say you in German? Arbeiten und Disziplin. Reform, too much reform. We have everything in place, and maybe we look at different numbers.
But you don't have honest government in place.
Many countries suffer the same problem, but we hope for the better. And I can tell you, if you look at the numbers, last year, Russian automotive market grew 20%. And most of the production come not from outside of Russia, from inside of Russia. It just level, how manufacture was developed for this, 5 years, what you mentioned. Public debt to GDP, 12%. Yes, maybe we were not so quick, to spending like Greece or Spain or Italy. We tried to balance. We have surplus. You can consider that surplus on, based on upon raw material.
As long as the oil price is high, you're okay.
And resources. Believe me, even if oil prices will go down, the Russian economy will not suffer too much.
I suppose.
But I just want to mention. We need to at some point be more positive on Russia. You have to compare Russia with China or India. Where do you think a better place to do business, in Russia or in China?
Well, according to the Transparency International report, it certainly isn't Russia, because you're number 143 out of 182 in terms of perceptions of corruption. You're on a par with Nigeria.
I understand your point. But if you ask serious businessmen among big companies, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, GM, Volkswagen, Boeing, Siemens, General Electric, ask hundreds of people, and you will receive 95% answer that Russia is a better place to do business now than China.
A final thought then.
This is reality.
Yes.
I don't want to challenge World Bank report. I just saying about what's my view as a businessman and who is practically doing business both in Russia, both in China,
and indeed elsewhere as well. I just want to end with this thought. We have a lot of Russian billionaires in London. You spend quite a lot of time in London, and it's rather well known now that you had social contacts just a few years ago with Peter Mandelson, with George Osborne, who's now the Chancellor of the Exchequer in this country. I just wonder if it's important for you to build those sorts of political links in the UK, and whether you too might be thinking of establishing yourself here in the UK.
I'd like to spend more time in London. Unfortunately, last year I spent less than 15 days.
And for the future?
For the future, maybe, but we're so busy, to help Mother Russia to go through the crisis and actually build our country. For the moment.
I mean, that's the point of it. Are you, as one of the leading Russian businessmen right now, telling me that you're absolutely committed to your future in Russia, or could you be coming
100%.
Here?
No chance. No chance that I will leave Russia.
Oleg Deripaska, thank you very much for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you.
That was an edition of Hard Talk presented by me, Stephen Sackur. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.